All right, looks like I'm seeing most of the folks who had registered. So in the spirit of respecting everyone's time, I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome everyone. Feels like it's been a while since we've seen you all in together, but we're also going to be seeing your lovely faces next month for all of our check-ins. So thanks for joining us here for this little informational webinar. I'm, because you all are familiar with Learning Lab, I'm going to save all of the Learning Lab 101 stuff and really just get straight to the RFP. So what I'm going to do to structure our time is I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes setting some context for why we kind of wanted to open up this opportunity for you all. And then I'm actually going to use the RFP page, our web page, to walk through some of the elements of the RFP, point out some of the resources that are on there, and then we can get to Q&A. So I'll just get started here. So why now? Why scaling? Why did we put out the Scaling Success RFP? Ultimately, we recognize that you all are doing some amazing work. And the collaborations that you all are a part of have been creating some awesome impact. And you all have really been turning the gears of student success. And we also recognize that many of the projects were maturing in a way that were approaching a state of readiness that could benefit from some additional resources to take the project to the next level. So for us, when we were developing this RFP, the goal really was to help projects expand. And, you can see here we have lots of more folks turning the gears of student success. We really want to support projects who have established some evidence of success and effectiveness and are ready to scale project activities. We want more faculty turning those gears of student success and more students benefiting from the excellent work you all are doing. And I do want to make one distinction about the idea of scaling before we kind of move along, and that's kind of the distinction between scaling and expansion versus continuation. And so, we really want to focus on scaling, which we really view as increasing the impact of the projects and increasing activity. So all of the projects are so different. That's going to look different depending on the goals of the project, right? So some of the projects may be looking to get more faculty to participate in a professional development opportunity. Some might be wanting to get more faculty to use a particular tool or an approach that they've developed. Others might be looking maybe to include other disciplines or departments who weren't previously involved in the projects because maybe the project initially was focusing on one discipline, and now there's some ideas to be broadening the project to other disciplines. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. So we want to really support projects to be able to scale versus continuing. We really see as just, doing what you're already doing at the pace you're already doing it and just continuing to do that. That's not what we're hoping to support with this RFP. So we just kind of want to make that distinction, before we move along to the rest of the RFP. And we'll have opportunities if people have questions about even the scaling aspect of it. We can talk about that later. Before I get to the RFP webpage, I just want to mention a couple of upcoming webinars that you all might be interested in. We've shared with you, but they're coming up very soon. So tomorrow we have a CID webinar. So this would be a good opportunity if you're interested in how aspects of your project may include intersegmental articulation and transfer, particularly between community colleges and CSUs. This could be a really helpful webinar if you want to listen in. Eric Wada is the Academic Senate's director of the CID curriculum stuff. So he's going to be joining us with one of his colleagues and providing an overview and having an opportunity for you all to ask questions about CID. And then finally, this one we just finalized and will be promoting soon, based on the Charting a New Course report that we released in December on calculus barriers to STEM success. We're actually going to be facilitating a conversation with some leading scholars and practitioners across the country, inspired by the report, but really, digging a little deeper into the role calculus plays in student success and STEM pathways, and what policymakers and practitioners can do to better support students in that pathway. So those are just a couple of announcements, and now I'm actually going to share my screen and just take you through the Rfp web page. All right, it says participants can now see my application. Perfect. So I hope that you all have had a chance to browse through the web page. It's accessed through this grants tab up here. You can see we have the seeding calculus strategies and then the scaling success RFP. So if you click on the scaling success RFP, you'll get the overview. You'll get a little sense of, for example, what our intentions are in terms of how many awards we're hoping to provide. We're shooting for 5 to 7 grants that are anywhere between 500 to 700,000. I never actually noticed that they matched the 5 to 7 and the 500 to 700,000. Totally just realized that for the first time. And each grant for a maximum of 2 years. And if you scroll down, you'll see that you can download the full request for proposals, which is the 20-page document that provides, all of the detail, and then the budget template that you'll use when you submit the proposal. So just to highlight a couple of kind of key elements of the proposal, and again, I'm assuming that most of you have taken a look at this, given that you're here expressing some interest in it, but a couple of things to point out in terms of eligibility. I think you all have probably already figured out that there is a little bit of a limitation to the eligibility, and that is that we're only opening up this opportunity to projects that are expected to be closing. Their grant agreement will be expiring this summer 2022. So there are some projects that are ineligible at this point, but we really do hope and plan to open up some opportunities in the future for others to get some scaling opportunities as well. So just wanted to mention that. And many of the elements are still the same in terms of eligibility. There's still an expectation that project teams will be intersegmental, and that the initial project criteria that was laid out will still be satisfied. So focusing on improving learning outcomes, incorporating science of human learning, adaptive learning, and then online and hybrid course environments. And then, of course, demonstrating support from your institutions. Couple of other key elements, though, that I think are good to point out, and this gives you a little bit more insight into what we were thinking about scaling. You can see here in the key elements in terms of, thinking about regional or statewide scaling, how to increase access to these newly developed tools that you've created, or the teaching and learning approaches, strengthening team capacity to successfully expand these practices. Of course, we want the projects to continue to produce and gather the strong evidence, since you'll be doing it at scale, gathering the evidence at scale. Again, continuing to contribute to human learning, science of human learning. And then we'd really like to encourage and support you all, facilitate the leveraging of other public and private resources. So that's just a little more insight into that. The timeline here, I would point out a couple of the big key dates. Statement of intent is going to be due on February 11th, and that'll be accessed through the online portal, which I'll show you how to get there. And then the full application is due April 1st. So those are the two big deadlines there. You can see in between, We have some applicant office hours that we're opening up for you all. We have our Q&A document, the Google Doc that you all have access to, that will kind of do our final update right before the full application is due. And then this gives you a sense for the review period for after you've submitted the full application, how long there will be a review, and then when the actual selection committee and notification of awards are happening. So I mentioned I'll show you how to how to get to the online portal. If you go to the Statement of Intent tab here on the RFP page, you can submit your statement of intent by clicking on this button right here. It'll actually take you to the online portal where you'll create an account and then submit all of the information that it asks for the statement of intent. So hoping to make it a little easy on you all, especially in the first stages of it, to get into the online portal. Afterwards, after you've already submitted a statement of intent, a lot of the activity afterwards will actually be driven through that online portal. But since you already have access to it, you won't have to be going, back and forth to the RFP page to try and get in there. You'll be gaining easier access through that in the later stages. The proposal, again, is going to be due April 1st, and the full RFP is going to give you a better description of each of these elements of the full proposal. But again, you all are familiar to this. It's probably not going to look a lot different from the first time that you applied, but there could be some details, and you just want to encourage you to make sure that you read really carefully to make sure you don't miss any of the details that are in these separate elements of the proposal. We will post more information about the selection process. Once we've solidified the selection committee, we'll share who the selection committee members are and things like that, so you all can see that. We'll provide, the links to the selection committee meetings, which are public meetings. They're open to the public for kind of the opening of the meeting, and then when the selection committee goes into deliberation, it'll go into closed session. Again, wanted to remind you of the Q&A section here, where you can find access to that Q&A Google Doc that I was mentioning. We'll be updating that periodically. You're here, you're at the Q&A Zoom session, so I don't got to worry about registering for that. And then again, we actually have a link where you can sign up for office hours if you want to just grab 15 minutes with us at some point, just to, ask some real quick questions, dig a little deeper on something. We're happy to join you and just kind of brainstorm and help support your proposal writing. So this is a way to just grab a quick 15 minutes if you want. And then I'll just point out a couple of the resources that we have here. I mentioned the online portal. When you access the online portal for the full application, there's a lot of questions that you're going to have to input answers for. What we did was we took the online application and turned it into a Word doc so that you can collaborate with your project mates on the online portal application. You can fill it all out, collaborate, do all the editing and stuff so that you can get it out of the way and then just cut and paste when you get to the online portal. We have a sample budget. The budget template hasn't changed a lot since you all started with your projects. However, there are a couple of differences in the ways that the budgets will be asked to be presented. So I would just point you to that and just make sure that, again, they're really minor details, but there are a couple of small differences there. We uploaded a logic model template. If it's not necessary, these are not required things that you have to use. They're just, if they can be helpful to you, we've provided them. But, if a logic model makes sense and it helps you kind of think about your project from, start to finish, different elements of it that belong in different phases, the logic model templates here just to help provide some structure to your thinking and brainstorming as you're developing your proposal. And then we ask about change theory, whether or not your project is informed by change theory. And so in case there were folks who weren't familiar with it, needed a little refresher, we've actually downloaded one of Daniel Reinholtz's kind of like overview articles on kind of what is change theory, just in case you wanted to have access to that as well. And with that, I'm going to stop there. I think that that's the basics. So I'm going to actually, we had a couple of questions that were in our shared Google Doc that hadn't been answered yet from Shenamar. So I'm going to actually ask those first, so that we can kind of start there, and we'll open it up to questions. If you want to throw them in the chat, that's fine. We'd probably prefer if you raised your hand. It's a little easier to manage if you raise your hand, but you can also, if you feel more comfortable throwing it in the chat, you can do that as well, and we'll monitor those. So I'll start with the first one. Shenamar asked, to what extent is further funding contingent upon positive results of the intervention in the pilot study? And with that, I will actually turn it over to Lark to get us started.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to see you or see pictures of you if you're not live on screen. We missed having a holiday get together, but figured everybody was super burnt out at the end of last year. So, and knew that there were going to be a lot of activities forthcoming, but it's really nice to see everybody. Before I respond to that question, though, I also wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of the tweet that Rob sent out through the Learning Lab account. Rob, I don't know if it was also posted on Slack, but just, I mean, higher ed did pretty well in the governor's proposed budget this year. And one of the things that we were surprised by is that a proposal, and again, I stress proposal, to have Learning Lab grant another $30 million in one-time funding for something called the Golden State Awards. Now, there's a lot more to come on what that really means, what that really entails. But the thing that I do want to underscore is that the administration, the Newsom administration, likes the Learning Lab model, but they like the Learning Lab model because of your projects, right? You don't like a model itself, you like how that model sort of lives and plays out. So I really just wanted to say that is a tip of the hat, honestly, to all the faculty involved in these projects and the work that you're all doing. So I just want you to know that even at the highest levels of government, with the governor's office and the Department of Finance, you know, your work is being recognized. So I wanted you to know all this. So in terms of the question that maybe one of two, to what extent is further funding contingent upon positive results of the intervention in the pilot study? Well, I would say, you know, I don't know if the question is one of degree or type, right? Because we do expect that the applicants will have some positive data to show for, some indication that this has a positive impact on students or on faculty, you know, which will make its way to students. We're not, you know, because the projects are so different, as Rob mentioned, it's not like we're saying, oh, everybody has to have like at least an X factor in retention, you know, compared to prior pre-COVID years type of thing. So it's not like one type of positive impact that we're after, but we need for you to show like, hey, what we did, the intervention that we created had some indication of positive impact on the intended audience, whether it was students directly or faculty, which we hope will then end up in terms of impacting students. So Shanamar, if you ask that question, does that answer your question? And you're on mute, so I don't know. I think Shanamar is actually talking. Shanamar, do you want to ask a follow-up to that?
I'm so sorry. I had an earlier meeting that got rescheduled and I just had to answer her question. So I heard you were talking in general about positive results in intervention. I think we were looking at our results. We have some qualitative positive results, but not enough numbers to get any real actual meaningful quantitative data.
Well, so, you know, to the extent if your positive results like exist in survey form type of thing, you know, bring what you have, right? I mean, yeah, we would all love to live in a world where, you had the best data, randomized, et cetera. But it was really, COVID made it really difficult also to do apples to apples comparisons. And we understand that. So qualitative data, quantitative data, bring us what you got by way of sort of the argument for why, why this project should be scaled. Right. And that is going to be on, that's going to require some sort of feedback, some sort of level of either data or qualitative feedback. So Rob,
I'm going to get to Natalia's question after kind of Shenimar's second one that she had in the Google Doc, which was, I think, a really great one. Does the intervention itself need to be across institution types / intersegmental, or can the scaling be all at one level, for example, focused on community colleges only?
Right. Okay. So yes, that is a good question. So the project itself still has to be intersegmental, which will require the involvement of a different institution type than the one, you are in. Can most of the scaling be done like, for example, in community colleges? Yes. Most of the scaling can be in one institution type, but we still do expect another institution type to be participating in that scaling, albeit at a smaller scale, so to speak. But yes, the projects still need to be intersegmental.
Awesome. So I'm going to go to Natalia and then to Shandy. So Natalia said, can the scaling include a deeper aspect of research onto what the intervention is doing and why it may work? So not just the scaling practice, but deepening the understanding of why and how it works.
So the answer is we would welcome that deeper aspect of research, but that cannot in itself stand for the scaling, if that makes sense. So we'd love for there to be deeper research and deepening the understanding of how things work, but you have to do that alongside at least some level of a scaling plan that reaches other students or institutions that your initial project did not reach.
Natalia, did you have a follow-up on that? I see you raise your hand there.
Unmute. Yeah.
I was trying to unmute myself and I kept doing other things, I was sharing my screen, doing reactions. Yeah, my follow-up was part of it because our numbers were really, really small. And so there's a lot of questions of segregating data or regions to understand a lot more how it would influence can only be done in a larger scale. So when we scale, it opens the opportunity to look at all of these mechanistic questions that we couldn't do in the smaller one. So it's not that it would be instead of the scaling, but the scaling allows for that. But we would thinking of devoting some of the funding to that part, which would not be, so not all the funding would be allocated to scaling, but some of it would be to understanding the mechanism. And that's what we're trying to figure out if that's allowed.
Yeah, that's absolutely allowed. Our expectation is not 100% of the funds need to just be, about the broader outreach. You can spend some amount of the funds to sort of deepen your understanding on the mechanistic aspects as you describe.
Is there an idea of the proportion of what that might be?
No, I would say because this is more of a scaling grant, I would say you probably shouldn't devote more than 50% of the funds to the research aspect of it. So, I don't want to tell you exactly it has to be 70, it can be no more than 75-25, but just, think about, as you're making your proposal, we're our point about this RFP again is broadening the impact here. And so whatever arguments that you can feed into how you're spending the funds of the broadening of the impact, make your best, proposal. And again, Rob, Marisa, and I, we're not in charge of evaluating your proposals. Your peers out in the world will be.
All right, Shandy.
So I had two questions. One is to follow up on this topic that Natalia brought up, and that is our seed project has developed modules and tested modules in some classrooms. And the expansion project, the scaling project, would develop some more modules, not as many as we already have, but a couple more, because from our project, we found we need some more. And it would scale them to many, many more institutions and classrooms. And it feels to us that in order to do the kind of evaluation of the success of that, we need to do several different kinds of research about evaluating the progress of the project itself towards its goals. So program evaluation, as well as research on the impact, student outcomes, and on faculty outcomes, because our work is to develop instructional materials and faculty professional learning supports for using those instructional materials. And so we have some information from our first project about the effectiveness for faculty, but we don't have student outcome data. And like Natalia was saying, by having many more locations, then we can start talking about student outcomes. We'll have the opportunity to do that. So I feel like I'm hearing that's fine in terms of what we're talking about. The second question I had was related to the review. So what are the review criteria for the proposals? Our colleagues, what are the criteria they're going to use to review the proposals?
Confirming the response to your first question, yes, impact on faculty is still impact as far as we're concerned. I mean, ultimately, we want this to impact students, and our theory is that it will, and that data will take longer to come by for certain projects, and that is okay. So just confirming that, Shandy. In terms of the review criteria, so within the RFP itself, and Rob is screen sharing right now, we put in a rubric section that ties really closely with, ties directly to the questions we've asked in the RFP. And what we did this time is we had this guidance for applicants section, right? So following the exact questions that were posed like earlier in the RFP, we have sort of a notes for you all rather than even the reviewers, but the reviewers will see what was our guidance for applicants, how did we frame it, what did we ask them to take into consideration, and so we expect that our selection committee members, and the way we're running this selection process is each selection committee member will read every read every proposal that comes through. And so they will see that this was our guidance to you, and then we'll look at your response. So how well did you respond to the guidance at hand? And so, for example, on Rob, why don't you stop right there? For this section, and Rob, which section are we in? Vision and plan for scaling. And so we've just repeated kind of the questions that were asked above. And then on the top of page 13, our guidance for applicants that we have stated was, does your proposal have a strong vision for how scaling will occur? Is it sufficiently ambitious and also practical? Does your proposal demonstrate consideration of barriers to scaling, including faculty mindset? How will these be overcome? Does your proposal make use of past lessons learned? So these are like simultaneously our notes to you and our notes to the selection committee for how we wanted you to address the question. And then there's a point system that the rubric states, like, so each section is worth so many points. But as you might know, at every RFP that we've ever run, we have not used the point system to be definitive. So there is no cut score. There is no whoever scores the highest is awarded. It is the guidance for deliberation. And sometimes we also can see like, oh, the scores are all over the board. And that actually helps the selection committee sort of know how to enter the discussion. Is like, okay, you know, I had this perspective, you know, tell me why you thought, you know, that, you know, this wasn't a sufficient response. So the scores are really just a clue as to, okay, what can we expect going in? Wow, there was a real diversity of opinion, or no, they actually clumped around. But it's really the organic discussion that leads the selection committee to then a set of projects to award.
So I thank you. I understand that. I guess my question was, is there guidance for the selection committee about how to use the information that's in that document? I'm aware of the information in the document, but what is the committee told is I guess what I'm asking in terms of what's expected of them. It helps us to know our audience and what the expectations of our audience are, so that we can best supply them the things that are going to allow them to do the job they're being asked to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm trying to think about like what we've told the selection committee, like what are their instructions? I mean, their instructions, you know, are to read everything, to use, you know, they're told how to use the scores, which is also, this is not definitive. We expect this to be part of your deliberation. The selection committees think about you know, the projects in total. We usually do like a first pass, and then there are proposals that, like, you know, fall into like a, oh yeah, everybody's convinced on the first go around, or everybody's very skeptical on the first go around, or the middle. So the first pass is to kind of divide them into tranches, and then we tend to use the second pass to confirm everything and to deliberate about the middle. We use that opportunity to provide feedback, but I mean, you know, Rob and Marisa, you know, I guess I'm struggling a little bit to think about, like, was there a way they used this information in a way that we didn't expect? You know, I think it's been fairly straightforward, and we're getting tighter and tighter in our instructions to them. We tend, you know, we tell them, though, applicants have only so much space to write. So even though you might have wanted to see more detail in something, like, we really limited them in their, you know, just in the space to write. You know, I'll be honest, selection committee members have really high standards. You know, they're good. They're very generous with students, but less generous with faculty peers. They want to see like excellent work, and so they will pick on things. You know, and we try to just sort of, you know, guide their expectations about, well, you know, this is what we asked them. We didn't ask them that. We asked them, you know, literally what you see. We really try to corral people into not judging on things that we did not ask for. So Shani, I still don't know if I've really answered your question, but we try to be tight and we try to be fair. And we also ask them to take into account geographic, disciplinary, and institutional diversity when it comes to recommending the final awards, which can also tweak things in the margin. We've never had a situation where it's like, oh, this proposal that everybody hated is now getting awarded. That like has never happened. So
okay, thank you.
Shani, you should participate in one of these selection committees in the future.
Well, we plan on putting in a proposal, so I won't
not this one,
but yeah, I've been on a lot of NSF and Department of Ed panels, and there's usually a pretty crisp one-pager guidance for the, and I was just wondered if there was something like that you already had as guidance.
No, we do a meeting with them to sort of just guide them through this whole selection process, and at that point they can ask us questions. But the guidance is really, to us, the guidance is really in the rubric itself.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Angie. Thanks for patiently waiting.
Yeah, hello, Happy New Year. Sorry, I joined in late, so I apologize if someone already asked these questions. But I had two questions. One is, when we scale, does it have to still be only in California, or can we scale nationwide? And related to that, so one is, can we scale geographically? And the other question is, can we scale by dipping back to high school seniors?
So yes and yes, but let me caveat the first yes about can you scale nationally is, we would love nothing more than to see, your projects be successful nationwide. We're not so turfy about having benefits accrue to other institutions outside of California. However, when it comes to though how you use those funds, we would like to see California institutions be the primary beneficiaries, or at least, some of the primary beneficiaries, right? Because the state legislature cares very much about, this accruing as a benefit to California students and California faculty, et cetera. So it's not that you have to exclude any kind of funding and scaling if, Washington State or Oregon or whomever, they're interested in this. But I would just say, watch the funds, because people will ask, well, why were California institutions left out? That might be a natural question. So the second question is about high schools. Yeah, we would love to see high schools get the benefit of this too. They shouldn't be your exclusive target, but they're welcome, within your scaling plan.
Thanks for the question, Angie. We have some good questions in the chat. I'm going to go to one that Bruce had a little while ago first. And Bruce, I'm wondering if you might be able to provide an example. He says, is it necessary to scale the project to reach more students and faculty, or is it possible to scale the scope of the project to deepen the impact on the same students and faculty? So Bruce, if you could just maybe give us an example of what that might look like, that would be helpful.
Sure. So I guess part of what we're thinking about is the focus of our project was on a curricular and professional development intervention. And, obviously assessment is deeply related to both of those things. And I'm wondering if our scale effort could focus on a change to assessment that would be complementary to the professional development and professional learning aspects of the previous project or the current project.
When you say a change to assessment, you're talking about like within a particular, so you're talking about your current project on the big idea.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so you're saying, well, let's then change the way we assess within, this this course that we had an intervention in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that if that's the exclusive focus of your project, that it would not be a good fit as an exclusive focus. If you wanted to add it in as like a component, I think that would be fine. Otherwise, it doesn't sort of meet kind of, what we would consider to be a scaling, an expansion that starts bringing the benefits of your interventions more broadly. But I do appreciate you're saying, okay, what's the next what's the next level where we could create a bigger impact on that population that we're already work with. So I would just say if you can make it part of a scaling effort, great. But if that's exclusively what you want to focus on, this might not be the best fit.
So I'm going to do a quick one that I think came from Matthew, which is, can we also scale by branching outside of STEM? Noted that their current project is targeted at STEM disciplines, but could be applied to other ones as well. So this might be a quick one, Lark.
Yeah, and so was that one in the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah. Humanities and arts and social sciences. That's Haas. Yes. Okay. The answer is yes. You could branch outside of STEM. we'd love to see some STEM scaling, within that, but if you wanted to say, okay, we would propose to branch in STEM, but also then, branch to arts, humanities, social sciences. Yeah, we would welcome that. And just so you know, we are actually really thinking about the intersection between STEM and arts and humanities and social sciences for future RFPs anyway. This is something that we're sort of actively taking into consideration. So just so you know, that sort of, goes along with some of our more recent thinking these days.
Natalia, I'll go to you after I ask one more question that Kevin had submitted in the chat, which is asking us to elaborate on what we said in the key elements of the proposal: encourage and facilitate the leveraging of other public and private resources to support effective teaching and learning at scale.
So what do we mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there is, again, this is not a deal breaker by any stretch, but it is just, is there additional kind of institutional support that could be leveraged, or is there philanthropic or foundation support that could be leveraged? It's just a way to sort of say, to indicate, that others are invested in this as well.
So,
all right,
to
Natalia.
Clarify that, can I
go ahead, Shandy.
follow up clarifying that? So Lark, for example, at San Francisco State University, we have a Center for Science and Math Education Research, and if that became the sort of hosting entity for the project, there would be indirect kind of support that they would be paying for, but we don't have to document, here's how much they're going to spend to be the home of the thing. That's one of my questions related to Kevin's question.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you don't have to sort of boil it down to a dollar amount or, FTE. I mean, if you have that information, great. But if you basically can sort of characterize the benefits that come from that sort of intra-institutional partnership and their commitment, their network, right?
That's really what it's about. Yeah.
Yes. By all means, please highlight that for us. It's not, you're not required to produce a dollar amount or an FTE related to it if that just doesn't make sense. If you do have that information, great, but if not, it's fine.
Super, thanks.
Tim, did you have a follow-up on that, or did you lower your hand?
I was just wondering if there's a specific example of a kind of partnership that you had in mind when you put that in.
No, we're just aware that, there's been different, some certain projects have gotten different kinds of support, which they've been able to leverage, whether it's, we got a CSU grant on, ATS grant that we're going to leverage to do the next phase of something, or the UC Office of the President, I forget what they call it. This is Ellen's area. But, so within systems, sometimes, projects have gotten grants that then build on that you've been able to build on. Same thing with outside funding, whether it's like, oh yeah, College Futures gave us some funding that we're leveraging or certain. And so it's nice to be able to just highlight that, because that sort of indicates, hey, other people have invested, are willing to invest in different ways, right? It's not always a dollar amount, but does that help you, Tim? Okay.
All right, Natalia, your go.
So much time I'm trying to make sure that I know what it was actually about.
Well, I know you added in the chat about the 2 years. I don't know if that's...
So it was actually related to that. In thinking about expanding to something that would include multiple classrooms and the logistics of it, from recruitment all the way to like training the faculty, to doing it, to getting results, to being able to show something for the results in the middle of what seems to be an ongoing pandemic. 2 years seems a little bit of a tight schedule. Like it's one of those things where if everything went well, I think you could have preliminary results. Maybe I'm just being like too cautious, but I was just wondering why, what was the reasoning behind, or the ideas behind limiting it to 2 years?
Yeah, so for us, we have funding every year that we're putting out, right? And we only have so many staff to manage everything. So part of it is driven by sort of our own internal logistics about how many grants under management can we have at any one point in time. At some point, we got to exit people. So there's that consideration. There's also the consideration of we do understand there've been a lot of hiccups, and I think, we've done our best to be flexible about funding, about, carrying funds over, et cetera. At the same time, we want everybody to feel a sense of urgency, honestly, because ultimately this is about, what are the positive impacts that we want to make, that we want your projects to make. And sort of the longer we stretch this out over time, the longer we're stretching out impact over time. We want things to be done well, we want things to be done right, and we understand there are things that get in the way, like hiring. And again, the pandemic has caused a certain amount of disruption. We want you to plan for execution in 2 years. COVID seems to have different ideas sometimes about what's doable, and we'll work with awardees about, what gets knocked off plan. But this is all to say, we want to see positive impacts. We want students and faculty to gain the benefit of these positive impacts sooner rather than later. So we constantly push grantees to execute, as quickly as they can in a reasonable, world. Sometimes the world gets a little unreasonable, though. We do understand.
And a follow-up to that, because there were no extensions for the seed grants that we were in, or there were no possibility for moving around, despite the pandemic over the last couple of years. Is there any foreseeing of, like, if the pandemic were to continue, that there might be? So I'm a little bit hesitant to committing of achieving a lot in the 2 years, knowing in the back of my mind that the pandemic may be going, that the classes may still not switch, and that just not be able to deliver if there's not, unless I know that there could be a flexibility of extending it for 6 months if like this continues or something like that. Does that make sense? It seems I'm just nervous about committing to something that I don't have a lot of control over.
Well, so with seed grants, we only got one request to extend the grant, which we did. We didn't get any other requests to extend the grant period. So if that's something that you want to talk about with us during the next check-in, please feel free, especially, as it pertains to unexpended funds, like funds that you just weren't able to extend. We were not granting no cost extensions, just as a matter of course. We wanted to know what was the hurdle or the barrier that you couldn't overcome, that you need, an additional 6 months, et cetera, to extend. The same is true for all the grants. This is why we check in every 6 months, and we hope that you communicate with us sooner if there is some sort of hiccup. We had one case where because of community college enrollment issues during the pandemic, they had to cancel a bunch of classes that were supposed to be part of the project. There's nothing you can really do about that. It's like, okay, is there something else that can step in, or another, faculty member who's willing to step in? Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And so, we say, okay, well, what does that do to the budget? And what does that do to the timeline? And is that something you can make up in the next quarter, or make up over, 2 semesters? So, Natalia, I can't guarantee anything to you, but just to say, we understand you're all going through real life circumstances, several which are out of your control. And then, we pretty much try to work with you to sort of get to a pivot plan.
Thank you.
Sandy, I think you're next.
Okay, I have a related sort of observation and question. And that is, I worked on a bunch of projects that were impact projects. And Natalia mentioned the idea of recruiting. And for a scaling project, recruiting is an essential component early in the project. And that recruiting phase takes about 6 months. Now, one of the timing issues is if the project has to begin July 1st, the recruiting phase would be set up to recruit people to do something in the spring. But if what you're working on is something they're supposed to do in the fall, you've lost your access to the fall recruits until 18 months later. And so it's not just the 2 years, but where the 2 years lies in the school year, depending on what the project is. And so that was an observation I wanted to make based on the other projects I've worked on. And I've worked on other projects. I agree that they've taken some have taken longer than they needed to, but I think the 2 years, while it's a wonderful push to have ambitious impact in a short time, it's also making at least us think about not applying because we really need 2.5 years, given our experience in doing scale up projects that are successful. And so I just wanted to make that observation. And so my question is, there are other ways, for example, that we might get leverage other resources to get the additional funding for 6 more months. So, and what kind of leeway do you see that there's a potential to have a conversation about that or no? To extend what appears to be the length of the California Learning Lab grant to 2.5 years because there's this parallel support or for any other reason. And so if there's absolutely no way, I'd like to know it now. It would be helpful. That's what I'm asking about. Is there absolutely no way that
I guess I'm not totally clear when you say getting like another funder or additional resources that then would sort of like logistically then cause a stretch out.
So for example, we could try to find resources to support us to get a bunch of stuff done early, and that if the Learning Lab funding began in January of 23, then the recruiting could happen in the first part of the year for fall of 23 implementation. That's what I mean, is that, but we would need to know that the January 23 funding was coming in order to,
yeah. Right now, the RFP states we expect like the project to commence in July, right? That's sort of the official start date of the project. I don't know. Let us think about that to sort of say, okay, well, if then the project does start, but you're saying Learning Lab, we wouldn't utilize Learning Lab funds until January 1st, 2023. Let us think about that as a response. But I do want to highlight part of what we put in the RFP is, do you have letters of support? They're not required, but do you have letters of support from other institutions that are interested in this, or other departments at other institutions? So that's sort of an indication to say, that makes your project stronger, because then you actually have sort of like hit the ground running kind of thing. Like we've talked to people about their interest and ability to participate in this even before you get awarded. So we're sort of saying, to the extent that you can actually start, doing that outreach now, it both helps your application, it also helps your timeline. And we will also
application, Lark, it helps the application. Timeline, not so much. Fall happens in the fall. And so trying to recruit people.
Right, but it is about the pre-recruiting. right? To say if institutions are
community college faculty in particular, community college faculty, the churn rate is so high.
Yeah,
I can't recruit more than a couple months in advance of the actual implementation.
Yeah, I understand community colleges are struggling though, sticking to like clarity on what they're actually even going to offer and who's teaching what. So we do understand that there is a certain amount of chaos, with enrollment issues, particularly at the community colleges.
Thanks.
Rob, anything additional that we haven't responded to thus far?
I'm muted. I don't think so. Let me just scroll up here and just make sure I didn't miss anything, but I think we got everything that was in the chat anyway. And if I did miss something that somebody put in there, apologies, please let me know if I missed one of your questions.
Yeah, and so if there aren't any other questions, we're pretty much, Shannon Barr, you want to go ahead?
No, I just switching gears to a totally more financial logistical question. Is there an easier mechanism for giving stipends for the scaling up other than like creating all these subcontracts? Or I don't, and maybe other people have experience with this, but I guess I'm having financial budgeting PTSD here. I've been working with 3 schools. Now, how are we going to work with like 10 schools? What does that look like?
Yeah, so Emily Magruder is smiling here, and so is Nika, because they've been pressing on Learning Lab to be an intermediary in terms of stipends. And so we're actively working on something right now to alleviate that burden, because it is a considerable administrative burden. So more on that to come, but we do have the foundation's commitment that they are actually willing to actually take on a lot of the stipend responsibility. So hopefully that won't fall to PIs it'll relieve some burden on PIs in terms of that headache. Just, in the minute that we have, I just want to, say thank you for attending this webinar. As Marisa said, we'll post it, we'll send it. But we know that this particular grant opportunity isn't going to be for everyone. Many of you are tired probably and could use a break. So we understand, this was not designed necessarily to be easy. In fact, you're running and it requires you to keep running. We're not going to think that if you don't apply for this, that you have no interest in, continuing your project anymore. We'll have to think about what we put out in the future. Not all existing grantees were eligible to apply for this, even just by virtue of where they were in their cycle. But we'll continue to be here if you have questions. I think the questions that Shandy asked and the point she made are really relevant. It's like our ambition to put your projects out there, and the reality that you're faced doing so, I know sometimes, does not, there's a lot of friction there. We do want to work with you. We will work with all awardees, but we do not want to let up on the gas pedal because we think what your projects do for faculty and students is really important. So consider that a compliment to want to really to spread your good work as far out as possible. So with that, 3 o'clock, please reach out to us, sign up for office hours if you just want like a 15-20 minute session with us to talk over something specifically. And we look forward to seeing you at the next check-in, at the next webinar, and really look forward to hearing about your successes. So take care and hope to see you soon. Bye.